All right, Shannon reads those books. Book number 2, The Wind in the Willows. And now I realize I should have done like a willow tree as opposed to another kind of tree. But that's okay. I hope that's okay. All right, The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame, published in 1908. So this is well over 100 years old. Wow. It makes the those books list because it is on 2 lists. It is number 16 on the BBC Big Read. I'm not surprised, it's very British. And number 47 on the Librarians Top 100 Novels. And why did I choose it? Well, after The Old Man and the Sea, I was surprised I didn't jump on something else right away. And so I got stuck for a little bit there, and I decided, when it's hard to decide, I think going for a kid's book is a good way to go, because it's less intimidating, and yeah, so that's why I went with it. And I would read it. I could probably get through it, that kind of stuff. So there you go. So here are questions for the Those Booksness. Did I understand it? Yes! Okay, so that isn't a huge challenge for a kid's book, but yes! Yay! I'm excited about that. Of course, my test on that is, what is this book about? It's about the adventures of Mr. Mole and Mr. Rat, or Mr. Water Rat, Mr. Toad, Badger, and many, many more. It's animal adventures. It's about friendship. I would say in a lot of ways it's about how you live your life and how you interact with other people. And then it also has this overarching theme of, not theme per se, but something that comes up several times is this sort of animal code, and it's really cute. I love it. It's like they don't even realize that there's a code, but it's part of the animal code that you don't do this, or you do that, or you would always offer this, or you can't say no to that. So there's something, I guess it's sort of societal codes or something like that. I don't know. Anyway, next up. Did I enjoy it? Yes, I very, very much enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the characters and the relationships. I actually I found myself very I found the characters very endearing, and I cared a lot about them, especially Mr. Mole, it's sort of like the adventure really follows him. He just sort of decides to sort of, he doesn't like his house, and then he just sort of sets off and then meets Mr. Water Rat, and then, they hang out a lot, and then it's sort of like, it's weird, because it's like he doesn't seem like the most adventurous mole, or that moles aren't adventurous, but he is, and then he sort of encounters all these adventures. So there's something really sweet about that, and I really like that. And I like that every chapter was an adventure. It was linear. There was development over time, and there were certain characters it featured, and sometimes it went in different directions, but mostly it followed Mr. Mole and his adventure. So yeah, and there were some ideas in it I had never heard of before, like the idea of, like, for animals, how, and I don't know if this is true or if this is just for the story, this idea of that home has a sort of there's a sensory perception of home, and that animals know where it is when they're close. And how they described it, the chapter in which they described that, was my favorite of the whole book. It was so fascinating and really, really tender, and I really I loved it. On the flip side to that, there were some things I didn't like too much. I didn't always like how Mr. Toad was treated. He's sort of like the oddball, and decides to do his own thing and really gets wrapped up in things, and so there's even gets an intervention and stuff. So I'm not sure how I was gonna say I'm not sure how I feel about that, but I actually feel like that's a bit weird, especially to have in a kid's book. So that's the only thing that kind of felt like, what? So there we go. Next question. Was it what I expected? Yes and no. I did know that it was a kid's. I didn't know much about it going in. I did know that it was a kid's story, so the yes part of that is the fun kids adventure story for sure. The no is the intervention bit. That was a little unexpected, and it was quite conformist. Like, I liked the animal code thing because it was interesting, but there was also sort of like in general there was a conformist attitude to it. So I didn't quite like that. Like, it's weird because Mole breaks out of that because he adventures when moles aren't adventurers. But there are some things that you do and don't do, and I don't know. There's something a bit weird about that, especially to put that in a kid's book. But maybe that's intentional. And also there were some stories I was surprised that I was kind of familiar with. I don't want to go specifically into them in case people haven't read the book, but I was just like, whoa, like, I'm familiar with this idea. There was one that was very specifically, felt like, oh, wow, that's this story or this fable. I don't know if it started here. I don't think so, because I think it started somewhere else, but there were some little things like that was a little weird. Yeah, I think but one of the stories was actually quite anti-conformist, so that made it really kind of confusing. Like, don't get caught in this idea or don't get swayed by this opinion, but it was also saying, but do these things. So it's kind of like, what? What's going on here? And it's just like, but then it's also just like, hey, these are just animals having adventures. So that was a little weird. So definitely more than I expected. It was deeper than I expected. Wow, I just realized that when I don't have a question that's something like, was it well written? I guess I don't, because I was going to say it's well written. I'm like, how come that's not one of my questions? I guess that's not something I mark something against. Does it matter if it's well written? I don't know. That's a whole other idea. Where did I go with that? This was definitely well written. Anyway, next up. Do I recommend it? Yes, I definitely recommend it. And for whom I would highly recommend this book. I think anyone would get something for it. It's a kid's book, and I can very much see this be a book that you would read to kids over time. Like, I don't think you can get through a chapter a night. I think they're too long. But definitely, I guess you can read to kids not just at night. Where did that come from? It's like, no daytime reading. Just kidding. Anyway, but can you tell I'm not a parent? So anyway, but I can totally imagine it being that kind of a reading experience, and also, like, for me as an adult, I really enjoyed it. I love the adventurous spirit and the stories and the characters, so I think anyone would get something out of it. And next up, will I read more from this author? Yeah, I definitely would. It doesn't look like there's tons. There's The Reluctant Dragon is the other one that is noted on Wikipedia, but I don't know how available his other works are. But I would be more than happy to read more of his works. Absolutely. And what did I learn? I guess mostly I learned that kids' books can be, or maybe usually are, conformist. That was the thing that really stuck with me from that perspective, other than the just sheer enjoyment perspective. And then the other thing that was kind of weird is I had a really hard time finding a cover that I liked. One of the things I do when I read a book is I keep a file folder on the computer of a picture of each of the books that I read, just as a sort of visual library to notate, what I read. And like the one that was on my Kobo was of Mr. Toad, and I very much associate this book with that image because it was on my Kobo, but it doesn't follow Mr. Toad. Like, Mr. Toad, it's kind of funny, it made me really think about sort of like, the protagonist to me is clearly Mr. Mole. Like, there's no, it starts with him, it follows him for the majority of the time, but Mr. Toad is such a huge character in terms of his personality is so big, and he just takes over the story whenever he's in it, so I can totally understand why he's on the cover. And then I looked at a whole bunch of other covers, and I kind of found one that I liked, but it's for a version that's not in English, so it feels kind of weird. Like, it says The Wind in the Willows, but it still feels kind of weird. So that was one of the weird things. And then also the one on the library, like, the image they show is different than the one on my Kobo, which always throws me off. So anyway, that's one of the weird things I learned, is that sometimes it's challenging to find a cover that I like that represents the book to me, which is also weird because I'm almost exclusively reading in ebook format, so that really helps me remember the book. So anyway, there we go. Yeah, so I think that's it. A 2 down is my second book that I've read from those books list. Over 350 to go, sort of in the 360 range. So, but this was such a joy to read. I don't feel it's weird. I feel like I got a little I got so excited about this project, and I feel like I got in a bit of a mini slump on it. Also, because I want to really structure how I'm reading it, and I think or what to read and how to read and what order to read things in, and I don't think that works. I think you just have to go with the energy of it and just pick the next thing and just not worry about that, unless it's a series, in which point I'll always start at the beginning, because that is what I do. But other than that, maybe I'm not going to be that structured about it. Oh, that feels so weird. That feels so weird. I think I am instinctively trying to read one a month, which I think is fair. I originally thought I would want to do more than one a month, but now that I'm in the groove of it, I think that's fair, and I don't want to do the math on how long it would mean that would take me to read it, because I want to enjoy this process, not just get through it. So, here's to the enjoyment of The Wind in the Willows. I would love to hear your thoughts on the book if you've read it, or if you're considering reading it. As I mentioned several times, I would definitely recommend it. So, go kids books! Woohoo! Tons of fun! Thanks so much for watching.